Welcome, everybody. So happy you could join us. Hi, I'm Miriam Diamond from the Encore Boston Network. And as you arrive, if you could please put in the chat where you're joining us from and what brings you here today, what made you interested in this program. So good to see people coming in on this morning. The Encore Boston Network helps people over 50 make a difference and have more fulfilling lives through work, service, and social action. You can learn more about us just where you registered for this program, encorebostonnetwork.org. And we are starting to fill in our winter events, so you can already start to look at them and sign up for our newsletter. Join us. Everything is free and easy. So when else do you hear free these days? This event is being recorded. We will send you all a link, and so you can view it again later. You can share it with other people. If somebody wasn't able to see it live or has to leave early, you have an opportunity to view it. So that's for you. We also welcome you to turn on the closed captioning if you find that useful. Throughout the program, we invite you to add your comments, your thoughts, your reactions, your questions. If you have a question, please write question before it, so it'll be easier for us to catch it. And we will continue to monitor that throughout the program. Our topic today is mastering the multi-generational workforce. So we want to help you learn why and how to navigate, tap, and maximize resources of a 5-generation workplace, both as a team member and as a manager. So our goals are for you to be able to identify who's represented in today's workplace, be able to state the strengths people of different cohorts and ages bring to their jobs, refute any myths or stereotypes you might have of a multi-generational workplace, and gain tools to make the most of a workspace that is multi-generational. Our format will be a discussion with experts, followed by Q&A. So again, I invite you to write your questions as they arise with the word question ahead of them in the chat. So let me tell you about today's experts. First, we have Chris Farrell. He's a senior economics contributor at American Public Media's nationally syndicated public radio business and economics program, Marketplace. He also is an economics commentator for Minnesota Public Radio. He hosts conversations on the creative economy. He's a columnist for PBS Next Avenue and the Star Tribune. And if that's not enough, he's published many books on personal finance and the economy, including Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life. And then we will be joined by Julia Correa, Senior Business Development Manager at Water for People. Water for People is a nonprofit organization committed to ending the global water and sanitation crisis. And in her job, Julia collaborates with donors, corporate partners, and foundations. Before this, Julia worked in outdoor education and volunteer management at a youth empowerment organization. They will be in discussion with Doug Dixon, who's stepping in for our original scheduled moderator, Kara Cohen of ARP of Massachusetts. Unfortunately, Kara is a little under the weather and she regrets that she's unable to host today, but we are very happy that Doug was willing to step in. He brings over 10 years expertise and experience supporting people with work and life transitions, and since then has developed resources and transition services for people over 50 who are changing jobs, re-entering the workforce, shifting to independent work, and or starting businesses. And he's very important because he helped found the Encore Boston Network and serves as our board chair. So without him, none of us would be here today. And I now turn the program over to Doug. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks, Miriam. I know this is a tall order standing in for Kara, but I'm going to do the best I can and hope that Kara feels better soon. And I just want to mention, by the way, that AARP has some wonderful resources to support job search and a variety of other things, including information on the multi-generational workforce. And we will be sending some links to you of some of that material with the recording when that follow-up email comes out probably next week. So let's jump right in. As Miriam mentioned, we're dealing now with a 5-generation workforce, people from 5 different generations working side by side. This is unprecedented. It's the first time in human history. And as our workplace is becoming more diverse in other ways, it's also becoming more diverse in terms of age. So, Chris, let's start with you, and I hope you have your economist hat on this morning.
Okay.
Can you fill us in on the factors that have created this 5-generation workplace?
So I think, the fundamental driver is that we're living longer on average, and we're healthier and we're better educated on average. And so really the driving factor in the 5-generation workforce is people are working well into the traditional retirement years. And part of that has to do with, sense of purpose, we're better educated, work as a community, all those factors that, are really sort of affecting in so many of our institutions, not just work, with an aging population. And on the other hand, we have a retirement savings system that has huge holes in it. Many people haven't saved much money as they get older. And so working longer also just really helps out their household income. So it's two pressures there. One is the sense of purpose. I've got all this skill, this knowledge, this experience, and I can continue to use it. And we all want to be useful. At our core, we want to be useful. And one way that be useful is at work, using that knowledge and experience. The other thing is the workplace is a community. And I think that's often underestimated, that it's hard to create community. It's hard to, when people retire and they actually have a lot of struggles to find a community. So this community aspect is important. And then there is, hey, a lot of us don't have much money, and earning an income, boy, that can really make a difference to our standard of living.
There also is a kind of a structural change in the workforce as well, right? There are fewer people coming in from the younger end of the line because of falling birth rates. Do you want to say a word about that?
Yeah. So, and it's really striking. So what is driving increased longevity? One of the factors is just people are having fewer children. And the workforce is not expanding, as you mentioned. The workforce is aging, and the workforce will continue to age. And this is a structural shift. It's not just happening in the US, it's happening around the world. If you go to Asia, you go to Europe, you're seeing the same phenomenon at work. And so it's, a lot of times this discussion is about individuals wanting to continue to work and the factors behind that, but frankly it's also a lot of employers, as the experience that we're having right now, where employers are looking for workers, they're searching for workers, they're trying to find workers, and frankly a lot of them are having to abandon age stereotypes, have to abandon the way that they think about an aging workforce, the way they think about job applications for someone who's 50 years and over. So the period that we're going through right now is a structural shift. It's not a momentary blip.
So this is not something that's going to change and go away.
No, not at all.
It's going to be with us for as far into the future as we can see.
Well, and this is part of the, you're part of it, Encore, and so many groups have been discussing about, as we combat ageism in the workplace, this is not a short-term phenomenon. This is not just because, Chris wants to work a little bit longer. I mean, this is fundamental. If we want to have an economy that continues to grow, if we want people to keep paying their taxes, if you want to have innovation, you want to have creativity, you really have to abandon a lot of stereotypes. And one of the common stereotypes is, once you reach 50, you're reliable, you show up at work, but creativity, innovation, that's not who we turn to. And yet, if you look at art, you look at music, you look at so many of the creative activities, that people who were creative in their 50s may be more creative in their 60s and maybe more creative in their 70s than they were in their 60s. And so it's abandoning a lot of these stereotypes that are holding people off.
So speaking of stereotypes, we see a lot of stories in the media these days about generational conflict.
Yeah.
Older workers standing in the way of younger workers moving up into positions of authority. younger workers, feeling as though, they're not given the attention they deserve and so on. You mentioned in a recent article that all of this is myth. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when people are talking about the 5 generations in the workplace, it's oftentimes framed in terms of conflict. Of course, you have to hire a consultant that's going to come in, it's going to deal with that conflict. There's often a subtext to it, but it's always in this framing of conflict. And yet when they do this sort of meta-analysis and they do surveys, what we really find is that whether you're a young worker, middle-aged worker, an older worker, the shared values are really strong about you want to be part of a team. You want to be an accepted member of the team. You want to be treated with respect. You want opportunities to learn. You want opportunities to grow. And age is not the factor in these shared values. And then we're living through an important period of time where, diversity, equity, inclusion is being treated more seriously. And so to me, aging is a key part of diversity. So for me growing up, absolutely shaping factor was the Vietnam War, right? That's just something that I grew up with. I work with people that I have realized that the Iraq War is in the history books. So we have different experiences that are in the background, but that's where diversity comes in. It's not conflict. Is that you're bringing different experiences, you're bringing different interpretations, you sort of have seen different things differently. So that's what is an engaging conversation, can be really effective in terms of how teams work together. So I'd really love to reframe this conversation about intergenerational relations, intergenerational equity, intergenerational diversity, and less about intergenerational conflict. Because look, we all know older people complained about younger people since the beginning of time. Younger people complained about older people since the beginning of time. There's nothing new about that. What is new is that in the workplace, you are there to solve problems. You're there to get a job done. You're there to, address your mission, address your values. And all of a sudden, the generations have to come together to accomplish that mission, to accomplish that values, to solve problems. And by bringing the generations together, as we talk about diversity in so many aspects of our life, the organization is richer, not poorer.
AARP did a study, I think a couple of years ago, that actually showed that people, older and younger people, like working together.
Yeah, they do.
They enjoy the benefits of being at a place where, there are people of more than one age.
Well, if you think about, in so many organizations, I mean, I love learning, and so many people do love learning, and you're curious. And so the notion that, I want to learn from the younger people I'm around, and I think that they want to learn from me. And I don't think that's just, unique to me. I think that's a story that you can carry throughout so many organizations. And again, that's why I think the framing of the conversation is so important, not to have a framing around conflict, but a framing around, it's about learning from each other. And, I just feel like some of the recent graduates, who come into the organization that I work with, it's really exciting to see how they're looking at things, to see what they've learned, to learn from them. And then also I'm teaching some of the intangibles about how we get things done at the organization, because we all know, yeah, there's a formal rule book. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at their formal rule book about how you're supposed to get things done, but there are ways that things get done. So passing on those intangibles about, okay, this is what gets done. That's an exciting exchange. That's where we both learn. That's where we have a relationship, and nurturing that. And that's where I think senior management really does come in. And senior management needs to be nurturing those opportunities, needs to be nurturing that kind of conversation.
So in that vein, there's some recent research that shows that mixed age work teams are actually much more effective than work teams built around people of a single age. Can you comment on that? Are you following the research that I'm referring to?
Yeah, so it kind of makes sense if you just think about it. But there's this wonderful research by an economist, Axel Schuppan. Hopefully, I pronounced his name properly, with the Max Planck Institute on Aging. And there are two studies in particular, but one was at a Mercedes-Benz truck factory. and they got access to it, and they got access to a lot of data. And what they found, two things. One that they found, just I think this audience would be interested, they found that productivity peaked when you retired. So the notion that your productivity peaked at age 50 or 55 just turned out not to be true. But the other thing they found is that the multi-generational teams were the most effective. And a big part of that had to do with the enthusiasm and the energy of the younger workers. And then when something would go wrong, the older workers having that experience and that judgment to bring to bear. And the combination led to the most effective teams. And if we think about it, that just kind of, I think that resonates with a lot of people. I think that makes sense, but they were able to document it. And then they did the same thing. They got access to a major insurance company. And again, it was the same experience. So, and what they found is that older workers, experienced workers tend to make more mistakes, but they make smaller mistakes. Younger workers, when they do make a mistake, tends to be a bigger mistake. And so when you bring the combination together, it's kind of you are at your most productive, you're at your most effective, but it's all about conversation. It's all about bringing energy and judgment.
And I've also read that mixed age work teams produce more innovative results. You know, they come up with bigger and better ideas.
Yeah.
And that companies that employ a mixed age workforce are significantly more profitable.
Yes, and this gets into the productivity. They're essentially higher productivity companies. But I think the innovation part is the surprise for many people, because there is this notion that you hit 40, you hit 50, you're kind of past your peak of creativity. And I think in a lot of organizations, it was not that the experienced worker was past their peak of productivity, it's that they weren't given the opportunities to be innovative, to be creative, to be part of the problem-solving team. And so when you have these mixed age teams, then there is more innovation, there is more creativity. There was this wonderful talk back in, I think it was 2005 at Stanford University by the late Steve Jobs of Apple Computer. And he talked about the importance to creativity of connecting the dots. But you can only connect the dots when you look back. And so you think about creativity is connecting the dots in unusual ways. And so when you bring these mixed teams together, when you have the different age groups, you're talking about diversity and inclusion and innovation, it's that ability to look back and connect the dots, but then also having young people who, we haven't done it why don't we do it this way? That profound question that people do ask, that why are you doing it that way? What if we did this? So you get that energy, you get that that exchange of ideas. And so I think this is important to the future of our organizations and our economy, is tapping into the knowledge and the experience and the energy and the why, and sort of like, why do we do it this way? And that's what you're doing when you have that diversity of age.
Yep. One of the other findings is that the workforce is more stable when you have mixed age people in the workforce, that young people stay around longer, and that everybody is happier.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, when you think about the companies and the organizations that do have mixed age groups and value the mixed age groups, they don't have a low wage, high turnover model, which a lot of organizations do. No matter what they say, forget what management says, look at what they do. And a lot of places accept a certain amount of high turnover because it's more, they don't want to raise their costs. I think one of the things that we're going through in this economy, we started out talking about some structural shifts. If you're moving toward an economy where labor is increasingly the scarce resource and the more valuable resource, your high turnover, low wage model is increasingly expensive. And, I've read these, I don't know, you probably have Harvard Business Review past 30 years, article after article every year about the cost of turnover in your organization. 30%, I think, is the number that kind of sticks in my mind. And I've read this and I've always wondered, well, why don't organizations like take this into account? I actually think right now what we're living through is a period of time where organizations are taking it into account, because it's not just that you lose a worker, but now you got to go the cost of finding a new worker, training a new worker, bringing them on board. And so this is a structural shift in our economy that really does support a multi-generational workforce and the stability that you're talking about.
So, Julia, I think this is a good place to bring you into the conversation. I love the backdrop, by the way. Where are you?
This is a picture from Bolivia. So I was there a few months ago, currently very much in Massachusetts, but I think dreaming and thinking back on a couple months ago.
Well, as a younger person, looking at the workforce from that perspective, what's been your experience, and how have you seen, Chris was just talking about management decisions, how have you seen management in the organizations that you've been a part of responding to these changes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Doug. I mean, Chris, what you touched on, I think is so applicable to not only my specific organization, Water for People, but just the trends overall. And so I think for the biggest thread that I picked up for Chris and that I find in our work is really about that commitment to learning. And I think some of the most powerful feedback or anecdotes that I'll hear from colleagues is when they really feel like they have a seat at the table and they're invested in their own personal learning and their organizational learning. And for me, the theme that I came back to, or what I admire or see in other people or in our own management at Water for People, is really this sense of humility. I think it's not just applicable in these conversations. For me, I think more of a life model or a way of living, if you will, but just showing up every day and coming with humility, both for yourself and giving other people grace as well. And so I think, Chris, I liked this idea, right? Debunking the myths that have to do with generational conflict. I think at any generation or different points, you can really hold on to those stereotypes or be limited by what you think other people think of your generation or what you think of your generation or others. But I think if you come with those mindsets, for me, it's humility and that commitment to learning. I think it opens you up to have other conversations and be more aware of the perspectives of other people. And so, as Chris said, it becomes less of a conflict and more of an opportunity and a discussion. And I think at Water for People, where we not only have a multi-generational workforce, but we also have a global workforce, a multicultural workforce. You can't do that positively unless you're open to those conversations. So I think for us, it's really just seeing it as an opportunity, as a value add. It's not always the most comfortable, but it's something that pushes, all the themes that Chris mentioned: innovation, learning, right? And it allows us to grow as a better organization as a result.
Can you cite an example from your experience of how the multi-generational workforce has been an advantage?
Yeah, definitely. I enjoyed thinking on this a little bit because I have both the more funny, less content ones where I have a boss of a different generation and she always says, "Oh, I want to be you when I grow up," which is just a nice shift, because there are definitely things about her that I'm like, wow, I want to be that in however many years. And so there's ways, I think, culturally for you to instill just more fluidity, right? Not everything has to be so structured or based on those age stereotypes. And I think that's something that I've enjoyed, that more kind of personal informality, right? Or genuine conversations with colleagues. From a structural standpoint too, I think I have a lot of those cross-collaborative meetings where, kind of Chris mentioned, we are really innovative and we're able to ask that question of why do we do something that way? And I think I'm thinking about one particularly that we've had recently, where at Water for People, we're in a strategic period shift. We're talking about our long-term strategy, and there are a lot of hard conversations that go along with that. Who are we as an organization? What needs to change? What needs to stay the same? But how are we storming with the elements of our model and our internal structure, to get us where we want to be in the next 5-10 years? And I think in those conversations, it's something I really appreciate, where we have folks who have been at the organization for maybe 5-10 years. We have other people who have been there for 6 months. And kind of to the theme I was mentioning before, everyone does feel like they have a seat at the table. And so, we're able to share those ideas, challenge one another to think differently, but it doesn't feel like, the challenging or the status quo is only coming from one end, meaning the older people are only representing kind of, this is the way we've done things, this is the way we have to do things. And the younger people are only being, the shakers of that status quo. And I think when you can come to that table and allow everyone to wear whatever hat they're feeling. Maybe they like the status quo. Maybe they see benefit in the consistency in the learning, or maybe they want to challenge us to do something differently. And I think I've appreciated those conversations, and they really make you think. And the last piece is, about the opportunity and the environment that our leadership creates at those conversations, that all ideas are welcome, that not every, idea brought up might feel easy. There might be ones that make you uncomfortable or make you feel in a position where your work or your ideas are being challenged. But that really is the environment we want to create to be able to innovate. So I think for us, creating those conversations, being okay in the gray area, I think allows us to develop a more intentional and long-term strategy for us as an organization.
Great. Chris, back to you. One of the things that has often been mentioned as a value for older workers in a mixed age workplace is their ability to, and you mentioned this, their ability to mentor and guide younger workers. But there's much more emphasis these days on reverse mentoring and cross mentoring, where learning occurs, as Julia mentioned, in both directions. Can you comment a little bit about that trend?
Yeah, I think this reverse mentoring is really exciting. And, part of it, if you take a step back, you look over the past 30 years, one of the things that happened is there was organizations really went after the middle management level. And, this was all for efficiency, lower costs. And what was underappreciated was that middle management really taught the new workers coming in the intangibles of the business. And so as you got rid of that middle level, there was just, well, how do we, our culture, our values, how do we transmit this? And so I think more and more turning to the experienced worker as a mentor to try and, show how we've done things, why we do things the way we're doing, what are our values, what are our mission. But what is so exciting about it going the other direction is it reflects that these experienced workers are working longer and want to stay engaged. And so I think it initially started out with a sense that, well, the younger workers have a sense of technology, they're more up on the technology. I think that's actually probably less of a factor now. And it's more that in their asking of questions, in what they're saying, as every organization tries to reach out to more diverse communities, have conversations with more diverse communities, bring, like in the media industry that I'm involved in, really trying to create relations in communities that we are traditionally not having a strong presence in. A lot of younger people that are being hired do have experience there. They do have insight. They do have relations. And so the older experienced workers can really learn from them. But at the same time, if you're creating, for example, a radio show, there actually is a stock of knowledge that really pays to know in order to bring a radio show on the air, right? So that's where you get this, and I'm thinking about a radio show that we recently created, that's where you get this really exciting interchange. And that's why I was nodding when Julie was talking about, having people having a seat at the table and being to express it. If you've never created a radio show, there's all kinds of things you would know that you have to do. They're kind of like just basic to getting it on the air that people will actually listen to rather than turn it off as soon as they hear it. But at the same time, you can't do the old ways of doing business. The industry is changing. The market is changing, and you really do have to think differently. And so I think this mentorship, reverse mentorship, is a way of formalizing that realization within organizations itself. And it also does the things that says, hey, you know what? Experienced worker, you have value. Younger worker, you have value. We value what you're bringing to this organization. And it builds off of what Julia was saying, which I just think is so important. It's about learning, right? It's about treating people with respect, humility, and mentoring and reverse mentoring is a way of saying, is really a way of formalizing those words.
So Julia, can you talk about mentoring relationships from your experience?
Yes, and Chris, I like that you brought up that word value, because I was thinking the first mentorship that I experienced was when I was in college. And you know, when you're starting college, and for many folks, although changing, if you're at that age of 18, a lot of your life has been quite structured up until that point. You go to college, and some people either strive or struggle with the amount of opportunity and choice that you're given. And later in college, when I joined as a volunteer, the youth leadership organization that I formerly worked for, it was the most agency that I had been given by older people ever. So much so that I was like, I don't know if I should be doing these things that they think I can do. But it was this notion of value, right? That they looked at me and valued what I could contribute. Also, I valued the experience that they brought from their decades of nonprofit experience and leadership management that I didn't have. And it was that very co-beneficial relationship, a more traditional mentoring structure, but one in which I was so grateful for at that time. And I still think has touched a lot of how I view leadership and mentorship and that idea of co-learning, because there is so much value in instilling trust and belief and value in another person, and making sure that they feel that within themselves, of the idea of being heard and being seen at a workplace or, you know, in a community. And I think most recently in my current role, I've had the opportunity to do that cross-mentoring or a co-mentorship relationship with an individual who is later on in her career, but we have landed at similar roles, both new managers in our individual roles, but have taken quite different paths to get there. And I've really enjoyed that cross-mentoring relationship as well, breaking down a little bit of the expectations of a mentor who's older and a younger mentee who's earlier in their career. And it really has just allowed us to collaboratively work through a lot of things that we're individually facing that oftentimes are a lot more similar than we maybe think when we're prepping for our mentoring meeting. And I've really enjoyed both. And I don't particularly have a platform in which I think cross mentoring is better or traditional mentoring is better. I think it's nice to try both. But I will say, being currently in a cross mentoring or co-mentoring structure, it's just a practice of breaking down those stereotypes, even maybe the stereotype that you have of yourself going into that relationship, reminding yourself of the value that you bring, but also opening yourself up to all of those kind of soft, intangible elements that Chris was mentioning, of working, of being a leader, of being a manager, and allowing those to flow more fluidly between mentor and mentee in that relationship.
So I just want to take a moment to remind people that we're going to be taking your questions in a few minutes. So if you have questions, now's a good time to enter them into the chat. So we'll be coming back to that in a moment. You know, one of the things that comes up a lot when you talk about mixed age workplaces is the phenomenon of an older worker reporting to a younger supervisor or manager. And I think that's probably fodder for a lot of the media myth stories, Chris.
Yeah.
What can you talk a little bit about that, and you know, any tips that you have for helping both younger managers and older workers, you know, come to terms with whatever apprehension that you have about that prospect?
So, and to be really clear, there is such a thing as a bad boss. Age is not the issue. We've all dealt with bad bosses. At some point in our careers, we deal with the bad boss. And there are bad bosses out there, and whether they're younger or they're older, doesn't matter. They're toxic for organizations, they're costly for organizations, and they have an unbelievable ability to survive for a longer period of time than they should in the organizations. So let's just put the bad boss aside. And there, I think there is a lot of apprehension. There is a concern. And I think it really gets back to a lot of the what Julia was talking about with mentorship. It's really about not looking so much at the age, but treating with respect, being sensitive to, the way that you say certain things. You don't want to play the curmudgeon. You don't want to play up to a stereotype. But I think the most important thing is, how have you related to your bosses, whether older, let's say to your older bosses? Well, you've been respectful, you've been tactful, you've been supportive, you kind of understand their strengths, you understand their weaknesses. I don't see any reason why you would not basically have the same attitude toward a younger person. Plus, you do need to avoid some of these, which we all do. It doesn't matter, you're young or old, you have certain you can kind of easily fall into a stereotype yourself and, start emphasizing my white hair, or whatever. And I think you want to steer clear of that stuff. But again, I would really go back to the fundamentals. You're trying to accomplish a task. This is your boss. How can you help your boss do their job well? And that seems to me pretty fundamental. And then to just recognize that there are going to be some periods of time when you might be two ships passing in the night. But the thing is, that was also true when you're reporting to someone who was older than you. It's kind of in the nature of the job itself. This person is your boss, they are your manager, and you can be two ships in the night because you just don't think this is a good decision that they've made, and you disagree with it strongly. And I would just say, forget the age component of it and just focus on the fact that you're going to disagree because you don't think this is a good decision. But if this person was older, would you talk down to them? Right? Why would you talk down to someone who's younger than you? So it's about being respectful and understanding that they are the boss.
So Julie, I want to get your perspective on this as well.
I love how Chris said that. Just naming, there are bad bosses. There will be bosses that you don't like. And I think in my experience too, that a lot of times there might be those areas of conflict or disagreement, or just simply they do one thing one way and I will do something the other way. But a lot of times age is not, the primary factor in those conversations. And I think from the reportee perspective too, that a lot of it, no matter what the age relationship is also self-advocacy. So I think that has come up internally too, regardless of the age is, what do you need as someone? What can you share with your manager that has to do with your working style, or how you want them to support you, or maybe how they can even complement one of your weaknesses with something that you've identified as a strength in them. And then that doesn't have to be, or shouldn't be when possible, right, flavored or impacted by that age relationship. And I think of specifically a former manager of mine who is still at Water for People, but has moved up in the organization and currently does manage quite, I think, a number of people under her who are older than she is. And I think without asking her, I would imagine that the conversations that she's actually having with them has to do with the fact that she is an extrovert and they might be introverts, or the fact that she works on this time zone and they work on a different time zone. A lot of those conversations about navigating their manager reporting relationship, I think, aren't actually based as much on age. I think that might, not to say that it won't impact how you're viewing them. And I can imagine too that it will be something top of mind if someone's starting a new role, anytime you are starting with a new manager, right? Thinking about how you will get along, how they'll impact your work. But I do think that, what can be in your toolbox are, two things, or one, advocating or really thinking for yourself about what do you need, and, working on vocalizing that to your manager, specifically, if it is a new manager, and that can be building that relationship. And I think the second thing, for a thread I've kind of made throughout this whole conversation, is I think just coming to the table, being willing to have some tough conversations. So for example, if you do feel like your manager, younger or older, is holding certain biases against you, knowing what resources you have at your workplace or at your organization, whether that's with HR, your talent team, or even just approaching your manager directly. I think a lot of times, again, it doesn't have to be exclusively age, but if elements, or even if you feel like elements having to do with age and ageism are part of it, knowing what support network you have as well. So I think it's present, and oftentimes I'm sure it does play into it, but I think a lot of those conversations end up boiling down to a lot of different elements. And as Chris said, sometimes it might just be a boss we don't like.
And just to build off just very quickly off what Julia's saying is, I think one of the things to resist is falling back that age is the problem. I mean, you may have a boss that doesn't have much empathy. They may have other strengths, but empathy is not a particular strength of theirs, as you're saying, an introvert or an extrovert. So it's a very easy thing to fall back saying, well, that's because they're younger, or that's because they're older. And I think we really just need to resist that temptation and sort of look at, okay, is it because I'm an introvert and this person is an extrovert, and this is just not, we haven't figured out how to talk to each other, right? And rather than falling back on, these millennials, they don't, they don't know how to communicate. Well, don't do that, but think about what's really going on here. And usually age is not the issue. It's something else. As you're saying, it's more about the personality of the people that you're dealing with and how they manage, and what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses.
So before we turn to questions, I want to ask you, Julia, about age diversity as a component of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that more and more organizations are actually adding in age as a part of their diversity policy. I think the AARP research recently showed that almost half have actually taken that step. That's up from about 10% or less just a few years ago. But I know that you serve on the DEI committee at Water for People. Can you comment on the value of organizations actually addressing age in their policies and practices in order to be able to create a more welcoming environment for people of all ages?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris mentioned this, I think, earlier, noting the point in time that we're at. I think that this is a huge conversation. DEI work for organizations, for our country, are top of mind. And I think a lot of organizations, including Water for People, have grappled with exactly where do you start, right? With tackling larger questions and conversations, some of which maybe we've been having for a longer time, and maybe some that are newer to us. And so I think the first thing for us, and specifically with incorporating age into our DEI policy, was really just naming it, making sure that it was in there, making sure our language matched with our commitment. And then I think it came down to having the data and the conversations that made it real. Because a lot of these concepts, I think, can feel theoretical when you're making policies or incorporating language on your website. But something we did in practice starting this year was, for our US-based staff, had an optional anonymous identification survey that asked a lot of questions, one of which was age, race, sexual orientation, different identification markers, if people felt comfortable answering. And so then we had data, we had something to look at. We had percentages of our workforce in different age groups. And so it just allowed us to start referencing something, that it no longer was just a theoretical conversation or assumptions that we had X percent of people below the age of 30 or X percent, above 50. And so I think from there, that gives you something to stand on and point to and leverage in those conversations. And as I mentioned earlier, we're at a period of strategic planning, growth as an organization. We are increasing the number of staff that we have. And so for us, another piece that I have liked that we put in practice is really building in, what do we mean by creating an environment for learning and innovation, and continued learning and innovation. And the reason I bring that up is because we have budgeted and increased our budget for professional development And I think that the reason why I think that can be really powerful is it is encouraged for everyone at any point in their career for topics that have to do with their role in the organization. And I think for us, as someone who does manage a team member, and for the opportunities for me to manage up, is leveraging that financial fund to be able to address the areas of growth that employees want to have. And so I think that my role on the committee, it's about making sure that those feel accessible to folks, that people can articulate and identify the areas of growth that they want to have, and then have that conversation with their manager about, I am finding myself, lacking in the skill set of how to get an innovative mindset, so what trainings or what resources can you identify? How can the organization support you? And I think that for me, that has been a way that institutionally or structurally we've made that commitment, and we want that to be accessible. And so, that's just one example, but I think trying to think of in my role with that committee for really all areas of DEI, not just age, how are we making sure that we're walking the walk, right? Like having it as a policy, having it as something that is incorporated, but then really making sure that it's put in practice, that employees feel like it is a resource, that it is useful, and it is accessible to them.
So I do want to make certain that we have time for some questions from our audience. So Miriam, do we have some questions lined up?
We do. First of all, people were asking about the researchers who did the studies that you cited, Chris, and in particular, the BMW study. Can you give us that source?
Yes. So, well, the BMW study, the best source to go to is the authors of it did an article in the Harvard Business Review. And they really gave a good explanation with the BMW. And then the Mercedes-Benz study is the Max Planck Institute for Aging. And if you do Axel Busch-Schupin, S-U-P-I-N, that one will come up. And then you can also get the one on the insurance company.
So we'll get those citations, and we will include them in the email that we send out with the recording for this program. Other questions?
Thank you. Yes, Julia, are there changes you would suggest for lifelong education curriculum and structure that will encourage multi-generational commitment to learning?
Yes, and I think I saw the range from pre-K to late life, which is a very long range, and I won't attempt to claim to be an expert on education across all of those age groups. But my initial thought is really on exposure. I think that I've never served as an in-classroom teacher, but as a student and in the opportunities that I have had to work with younger students, exposing people to dynamics and opportunities to learn that don't have to be within that traditional, in this case, age dynamic, right? I think when you think about teachers, when you're growing up in school, a lot of that is reinforced structurally just by the nature of your age and the nature or the age of your teachers. And so, as I mentioned, I had exposure to really pivotal mentorship relationships when I was in college. I also had opportunities to work closely, and if Kara is still on, I met Kara while I was in college and worked for AARP. And it was a very different environment than I was day to day in my classes. And so I think just when we can build that in or encourage it, have internships, have curriculum that allows for that cross-generational learning at an early age, I think that can be really beneficial for younger generations as they're learning. I think from the standpoint of older generations, again, not as much experience with this, is trying to expose yourself and look for those trainings or environments or calls like this in which you have the opportunity to learn. When Chris was talking about, starting up a radio show or all this content that we have, podcasts, articles, there are a lot of groups and spaces where people are learning. And so I think just encouraging people to find those spaces, topics that resonate with you that don't have to be as prescribed by age, that allow for more fluidity of attendees and representation and ideas.
Thank you. Chris, can you perhaps one initiative that would help companies encourage them to hire older people if they are reluctant to do so?
Ooh, one initiative. That's one of those multifaceted. I don't know if I can come up with one thing, because in the background, I think there's nothing more important than a tight labor market. There is nothing more important than an environment where companies and organizations are looking for workers as opposed to workers looking for companies or organizations. I mean, if you think about this period of time that we're living in, and one reason why I think so many organizations are still struggling is that, for the past 2 decades, there had been a line of workers out the door. And not only a line of workers out the door, so because there's a line of workers out the door, you know what? We need an HVAC technician. Well, why would you want to hire an ordinary HVAC technician? Let's have an HVAC technician with a master's degree. And not just with a master's degree, but how about in classical music? And not just in classical music, but let's do an original composition that you play on a piano that you made yourself with sustainable materials. And then maybe we'll consider you. Now we're in an environment where, are you an HVAC technician? So I think we're in a very different environment. In the background is the importance. And then it's like organizations like Encore Boston, a group in Colorado, really exposing organizations to the value and the benefits of experienced workers. But it is an enormous mind shift, because I don't think it's an issue of finding the workers. I think you're really trying to change the mindset of the people who are doing the hiring. That's where you need to focus, is the people who are doing the hiring. And so the background pressure is there. And if you want to, get the job accomplished, and we saw a lot of people during the pandemic retire for a variety of reasons, pushed out of their job, concerns about COVID. They have skill, they have knowledge, they have experience. Okay, they were out of the labor force for 2 years. So what? They're not brain dead. Start hiring them, start reaching out to them. So what I really would focus on is on the hiring managers and on senior management, because the senior leadership does not say, look, we got to stop this. We got to stop this prejudice. We got to stop this stereotype. This is unacceptable. If they're not doing that, then it's just going to continue.
So relate to that, once you're in a multi-generational workplace, how do you start the conversation about how to best work together and overcome the stereotypes? And this is for both of you.
I'd be curious what you think, Joe. I mean, my sense is usually these conversations, you're solving problems at work. So you're around the table to solve a problem, and you participate in that conversation. And so I think it's more about, for me, it's more that you're at the table, that you've been invited to be at the table, as opposed to saying, well, we got this technology problem. We're only going to have young people here because, they really understand the technology, and the older ones, they don't know what they're doing. That kind of stereotype. And I don't think that's happening as much as it used to. But it's like, if you're at the table, you're solving the problem, you're having a conversation. It's just really important to be at the table.
Yeah. And to add to that, organizationally with Water for People, not particularly around age, but we've had moments where we, as a larger team, had to address some challenges, some dynamics, some unhealthy or patterns that we were noticing as an organization within our workforce. And so a lot of times they are really uncomfortable, long periods of silence conversations where you're bringing people together. And I would say that, that can exist one-on-one if, again, advocating to someone like your manager or other people on your team, if you need to address those stereotypes or experiences you're having. On the flip side, as I mentioned, we've also done it as a whole team, and they have different benefits. They're for different uses and in different environments. But I would say, identifying where you find yourself, your team, and your organization on that spectrum. Not everything has to be a full organization team conversation, but I think we've really benefited from putting these things out there and speaking to experiences that maybe people had been feeling in isolation, and then just naming them. It doesn't mean that everyone has experienced them. It doesn't mean that it identifies or represents the core of who you are as an organization, but at least it creates a space where you're naming that for other people. And so I think that's where you get not only a space in which people feel comfortable to share their own experiences if they've experienced elements of ageism or discrimination or whatever they've had individually, but also where solutions can arise in a really collaborative and trusting space. And so I would just say, again, you don't have to have that conversation if you don't need it, but you can practice the same toolkit on one-on-one conversations too, right? Speaking to your experience and creating a space. And again, hopefully it's well received. You can't always, you can't control what the other person's going to bring to the table, but you can have already done that thinking and that reflecting on your own to figure out how you want to show up for that conversation.
Miriam, I think we have time for maybe one more quick question.
Okay. Oh gosh. There's so many wonderful questions out here. So I wonder, one of the questions I have for Chris and Julia is, can we contact you afterwards if people want to ask questions? Are you willing to give us some way that we can get in touch with you, and can you put that in the chat? Because we can also include that in our follow-up emails.
So Doug, just my email address would be the way to do it.
We'll do that.
Okay, great. And also if you want to share your websites or anything like that. So Chris, what are the shifts you've seen in terms of how generations approach their careers? And how can organizations become more agile in responding to these changes? Just a quick question.
Yes, a quick question. I think that what is different and what Julia was mentioning earlier about professional development, and a lot of companies moved away from training because the background idea was, well, I'm going to train this person, they're going to leave and go get a better job. Now with this shift in the economy, there's more money going into training. And so I think it's more about thinking about providing the opportunities for professional development and training within your organization at any age and encouraging it, because training typically goes way down as people get older, and the employers are less, they sort of like are less saying, come on, take the training course. So I think training, professional development is really important throughout one's career, and that leads to a better employee. And I think it would address this issue.
So thank you both,
Great.
to Chris and to Julie. And I want to, before I turn it back to Miriam, I want to call out the resources that Kara has been entering into the chat. And Kara hasn't had the voice to participate, but she has her own voice in the chat with wonderful resources. So thank you, Kara. And we'll include those again in the email that we send out following this event. So thanks to you both. And now over to you, Miriam.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you, Chris, Julia, Doug,
Thank you.
and Kara remotely. Feel better soon, Kara. Thank you, Kendra Mrozik, our administrative coordinator and technology experts who make all this happen. Thank all of you for your conversations and your wonderful questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Please let us know in the chat what is a takeaway you got from today. We would love to hear that. Any ideas for future programs, any other comments or suggestions, we'd love to hear. We're getting a lot of rave reviews. Appreciate that for all our presenters and facilitators today. This session has been recorded. We will definitely send you a link so you can share it with all your colleagues and coworkers and anybody you feel really would benefit from it. And again, we will include the resources. Please feel free to go to our website, encorebostonnetwork.org, and join us if you haven't yet. Just because you signed up doesn't automatically make you a member, so you can join us. It's totally free, and you can look at all the other resources that we have. We are going to take a short programming break for the holiday season. We wish you all a good time at the end of this month, beginning of next month. And in the meantime, if you miss us, feel free to look at our website and look at previous recordings. We will return in January. We are putting together an exciting slate of really timely and engaging programs, including Identify Your Purpose and Putting It to Work, Mitigating Loneliness and Social Isolation, How to Position Yourself for a New Job if you've been out of work for a while or have a job gap in your history, Tips and Support for Caregivers, and a very popular age-friendly employer panel. So that's just some of the things we have going on right now. I am updating the website regularly, so I recommend that you check in every few days or week or so if you want to see what's going on. You can always check your email. I wish you all a great break, nice holiday season, and look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you so much for joining us.